You good? All right, welcome to EEE, or as I call it, EQUAD, the Education, Energy, and the Environment and Elections Committee. Chair Feldman is at another committee right now, but we are going to get started. So thank you all to the delegates and the advocates who are here with us today. Just a reminder to please not use acronyms so that all of us and anyone watching from home will know what it is you're talking about. We are going to start with Delegate Love, who has two bills, House Bill 1101 and House Bill 1511. Delegate Love, do you have a preference as to which one you'd like to start with?
I do, Madam Chair. If I can start with 1511, and then with your indulgence, my cross file Senator Augustine is not here yet. So if we could hold 1101 until he gets back.
That makes sense to me.
Thank you so much.
Welcome to EEE. It's nice to have you here. You may begin your testimony on House Bill 1511, Forest Conservation Act modifications.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of EEE, Delegate Sarah Love here to present to you HB 1511. Last year, we all passed a groundbreaking update to our Forest Conservation Act. In the interim, some of the counties have come to DNR needing more information before they can, Department of Natural Resources. I didn't say FCA. They came to the Department of Natural Resources asking for more information so that they could be in compliance with the updated Forest Conservation Act. Now, to be clear, the Department of Natural Resources has done everything they were required to do under the legislation, but these counties needed a little bit more time and a little bit more assistance. So that's what this bill really is all about. It is giving those counties more time and more information to be able to comply with the updated Forest Conservation Act. It looks a little bit more complicated because we had to adjust some other dates so that everything was smooth. So we had to adjust the dates for forest mitigation. I've got another amendment to make sure that the solar date stays as it is. Solar doesn't cut down trees, so they don't need to have the date pushed back for afforestation. So it looks more complicated than it is, but bottom line, they just need a little bit more time and a little bit more assistance from the Department of Natural Resources. I have both Dylan Baylor from the Department of Natural Resources and Dominic Butchko from Mako somewhere, both of whom are in support. There was no opposition. So I respectfully request a favorable report on HB 1511.
Delegate Love, colleagues, any questions? I see none. That completes the hearing on House Bill 1511, and we will hold the other bill for Senator Augustine, which means that the next up is Delegate Charkoudian. That will be House Bill 1112, Public Service Commission Energy Storage Devices Acquisition and Deployment.
Nice
Moira Cyphers, I saw Moira just walk in. And Matthew Richwine, is he here online? Miles Mitchell. So these are audience and anyone watching from home. We have sometimes limited testimony, up to 3 proponents and up to 3 opponents for some of these bills, but we always start with the sponsor of the bill. So Delegate Charkoudian, welcome. You may begin your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Delegate Lorig Charkoudian here asking for a favorable report on House Bill 1112. I want to thank you for taking this committee and also for adding some of the expert witnesses who hopefully can answer some of the questions. I know that you all have, this is in some ways, it's a super simple bill because all it is enabling, and it allows the Public Service Commission to make a decision with a bunch of data that they will have access to. And if they think the decision is right for Maryland ratepayers, they will make that decision. And if they think it's wrong for Maryland ratepayers, they won't make that decision. So I think that that's kind of the good news because it's enabling, it gives them that option. And we don't have to necessarily understand all the technical factors that they're going to take into account. But I do want to go through what what it is that this does and why I think it's really important that we pass this bill this year to put this tool in the toolbox of the Public Service Commission. I know that you all have taken a lot of time to think about the Brandon Shores situation. This bill is not specific to Brandon Shores, but Brandon Shores gives us an opportunity to understand what this bill is about. I know you took a field trip to PJM. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I know you took a field trip to PJM, and I know that you all are very concerned about what the Brandon Shores situation means for our ratepayers. I am too, and that's what led to my exploration and ultimately this decision. So we just walk through what's going to happen in terms of Brandon Shores. As you know, Brandon Shores, because that coal plant is no longer economical, Brandon Shores announced its retirement, as many coal plants and other plants in the PJM region are doing now or likely to do in the next several years. When Brandon Shores announced that, it was identified that the area that is served by Brandon Shores is a constrained reliability area. And so PJM took action. And the first thing they did was they said, okay, Exelon, we need to build transmission as quickly as possible to bring in energy primarily from Peach Bottom into that area. As you know, that transmission is going to cost roughly $800 million to our ratepayers. It needs to be done. It's unfortunate. There might have been things we could have done to avoid it, but at this moment in time, that does in fact have to be done. So this bill doesn't change whether or not that $800 million of transmission gets built. What this bill addresses is what happens in the meantime, because right now, the only option in the meantime is that our ratepayers pay what is expected to be $250 million a year, although it could be more, to prop up a coal plant that has already said we need to retire. And essentially, they're in the driver's seat to ask for whatever price they want. So we're expecting $250 million a year for the next 4 years, but it could be higher. They have all the cards in their negotiation. Brandon Shores does. What this bill does is it says, okay, Public Service Commission, if you have analysis in front of you that shows that taking that same money or less and putting it to storage would give us the same reliability that keeping the coal plant around would do. So we're not sacrificing reliability. But if putting that towards storage will give us that same reliability, then you are authorized to make the decision to put that money towards storage. Because if we do that, on the other end of this, we have storage on our grid, which continues to be really helpful. It's something on the other end instead of a retired plant that we just flushed money down the toilet to keep open. And so the idea is that we're investing ratepayer money as opposed to putting it into the coal plant. So the way this bill works is an analysis has been done that suggests that this is a possible path forward. You're going to hear from the person who did the analysis, and you're going to have an opportunity to ask him questions. He'll be online in a minute. So the analysis has been done, but I just want to be clear that you are not being asked, we are not being asked as a body to determine whether we think storage is going to provide the reliability that reliability must run the payment to the coal plant would do. We are only authorizing with this bill PSC's ability to say, if in working with PJM, it is determined that storage does provide that same reliability, then we will invest Maryland ratepayer money into something that will be valuable to Maryland in the long term, as opposed to just putting it into the coal plant. So that's what this bill does. I'm giving the example around Brandon Shores because that's front and center, and I know it's on many of our minds. But it's worth noting that even if this doesn't work out for Brandon Shores, this is an enabling situation. It's an enabling policy for the Public Service Commission that they can use in any retirement or any constrained zone situation that we might see over the next 5 or 10 years. I'm happy to take any questions. You want to hear from panelists first and then take questions. I can do it that way.
Thank you, Delegate Charkoudian, for your testimony. Let's hear from the witnesses, then we'll open up questions. Ms. Seifert, if you want to go next. Then...
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Maura Seifert with the American Clean Power Association here in support of this legislation. Delegate Charkoudian did a great job explaining the bill. It's got a pretty strong coalition of stakeholders behind it. But we do want the PSC to have the option to consider cost-effective alternatives to reliability must-run agreements. Because right now, dirty fossil fuel plants are being compensated to remain on the grid beyond the date which they're set to retire. And while these agreements, their aim is to ensure reliability, as new resources are brought on to replace older, more costly generation facilities, they're not always the best path forward. And so you can look to other states, which are investing pretty heavily in energy storage systems. They're a leading technology of choice across the country now, for keeping the lights on and costs low. So in states like Texas and in California, energy storage facilities have helped keep the lights on, help reduce energy prices during extreme weather events. So this bill really would just ensure that the PSC has the ability to explore other cost-effective options for maintaining reliability besides keeping older fossil fuel plants like Brandon Shores online past the retirement date. So happy to answer questions, talk about long duration storage as a technology and what this bill could mean for Maryland. Thank you.
Okay, why don't we go to Mr. Mitchell? Why don't you,
Yes.
and everybody I should have said is on the 2-minute clock. Okay, other than sponsor. Ms. Mitchell, why don't you proceed?
Good afternoon, Chair Feldman and committee members. I'm Miles Mitchell. I'm the Deputy General Counsel at the Maryland Public Service Commission. I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify on this important bill. HB 1112 aligns with the holistic planning approach that states in the Mid-Atlantic region have been discussing with PJM for some time. It's also consistent with the direction in which other states and other transmission organizations are headed. That is, the inclusion of energy storage and transmission planning. The essential purpose of the bill is to save ratepayers considerable costs by 1, avoiding or reducing the need for generator must-run agreements, reducing the cost of meeting short-term reliability needs, and 3, advancing Maryland's long-term energy needs. We'd like to thank the sponsor, Delegate Trokudian, for her leadership and other stakeholders for working on a group of bill amendments that add additional clarity, certainty, and ratepayer protections. We believe the bill, as amended, will send a clear signal that the PSC is positioned and authorized to work proactively and cooperatively with PJM to develop safe, reliable, and cost-effective solutions in response to future generation retirements. With the amendments recommended, PSC urges a favorable report, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, sir. Before we open questions, let's take our one virtual witness, then we'll take some questions after that. We've got Matthew Richwine, although it's Matt Richwine. Mr. Richwine, you've got 2 minutes and you're signing up straight favorable. So why don't you proceed and then we'll take questions.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Matthew Richwine. I'm a founding partner with Telos Energy. Telos Energy is a firm that provides engineering and economic analysis of the electric grid and power systems all across North America. And today I'm here to summarize the feasibility analysis that we conducted related to the deactivation of the Brandon Shores power plant. The objective of our analysis was to explore options for shutting down the plant as near to the targeted date as possible, thereby reducing the reliability must-run or RMR payments, while also maintaining the standard of reliability in accordance with PJM's criteria. For this analysis, we worked with PJM to acquire their models that they use to conduct their deactivation analysis. Because these models are extremely complex, we started by replicating their analysis to benchmark our work against theirs. Then we extended their analysis to explore alternatives. The alternative portfolio that we studied consists of a combination of transmission reinforcements, the same that PJM had approved, but with a prioritization on the shorter time frame projects, in conjunction with a battery energy storage site located at the Brandon Shores point of interconnection. Our analysis found that not only was the alternative portfolio feasible, but it presents a net economic benefit if it can reduce the RMR payments by even as little as 1 year. These savings grow substantially if major transmission construction projects don't meet their anticipated schedule. Our analysis shows that alternatives like the ones we studied warrant further consideration. Thank you for your time today.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? We're going to start with Senator Watson.
Thank you, Delegate Charkudian. Yes, we went on our road trip over the summer. And so the question I have is, I thought the plan to deal with the closure of Brandon Shores was to give give Brandon Shores enough time to stay in business while we worked on more transmission lines going from west to east, right? And so we wanted to shore up Brandon Shores to give that ability more time. So is the battery storage a different option, or do we still need, in your opinion, additional transmission lines, coming across the country to help fill the void of generation capacity that we're going to lose?
Yeah, absolutely. So great question. We definitely still need the transmission. It's my understanding that the transmission that's been approved is going to come from Peach Bottom in just north of the border in Pennsylvania into the state. So that absolutely has to be done. And this bill doesn't touch or change that, although this bill might allow some of that to move a little bit faster. But what most of this bill is focused on is the part that you were saying about the shoring up of Brandon Shores. Because right now, the way that works is it's a negotiation that happens between Talon Energy and PJM. And PJM says, we need the energy, right? It's a peaker plant. We don't need it 24/7. We need it when we need it, 5 times in the summer. We need the energy. So you tell us, even though you told us already it's not economical, you need to shut down, tell us what you want us to pay, and we will pay whatever you ask for. Ratepayers will pay whatever you ask for to stick around for 4 more years while we build that transmission. And what this bill says is, it does 2 things. It says, instead of saying we'll pay whatever you ask for, if a study like the one we have or other studies go in front of the PSC that show building storage would be, let's just say, 150 million a year. I'm making these numbers up now. And reliability must run would be 250 million a year. And storage would keep the lights on just as well as reliability must run, shoring up Brandon Shores. Then the PSC is authorized to take ratepayer money and put it into the storage instead of the reliability must run, because that storage will be useful for us on the other end of that. So not only will it keep the lights on during the building of the transmission, but it'll have a useful life on the other end. So we're using ratepayer money to build something useful instead of just to keep the Brandon Shores running.
Battery storage units last in terms of years?
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the life of battery storage for long duration, it's a newer technology, but around 20 years, their rated capacity does diminish over time.
Right.
But yeah,
About 20? Okay.
it's reliable technology.
Thank you.
Okay, any additional questions? We've got Senator Simoner.
Thank you. Again, I say this too many times this session, but we're new to energy. This used to be a different committee, so we're learning. If I understand, we're giving PSC the decision to make this determination, the battery storage or not. And just last week, we were dealing with a bill that was talking about mPower. And we gave PSC the decision how to rate that out. And basically, they decided to delay the money being paid. So it started getting interest and so forth. So we're actually paying $1 billion more for that decision that was not under legislative control. What protections do we have in this bill that if we give them that decision and say they start saying it costs 150 million to build this, they start building it because they're gonna have to build it while they're still getting energy from Brandon Shores. And then at some point they say, this is not gonna meet our requirements. So then we end up paying Brandon Shores the money. And then we've also invested in another 150 million. Where is the protection in this process to the ratepayers?
Well, can I try to answer it with 2 pieces, and then maybe if you want to follow up? I think it's important to understand that what this bill, there's 2 decision makers still in this bill. So PJM is still ultimately the decision maker for what is reliable on the grid that they manage. So even if PSC were to say we want storage instead, if PJM doesn't ultimately agree with this analysis that Matt was just talking about, then PSC is not authorized to just go build it. So that's just in terms of where the authorization is. They're still ultimately responsible for reliability. In terms of the decision about the money, you're right. And I think this is what your question is, but I just wanted to clarify the technical decision as well. The decision about the money and what the bill says explicitly, and I could find the places if you want and follow up with you, but it basically says they have to compare the cost of storage to what we expect the cost of reliability must run to be. So that is the price point. So whatever we otherwise would have been paying to reliability must run is the price point to which the price of storage has to be compared. And then when it's competitive or less costly to do the storage, then that's where the PSC would authorize storage. So it is what we are putting in statute directs them on that very point. Did you want to add to that?
I would. And also, I want to note that what actually happens is when a facility such as energy storage is put on, they're actually, and this is in response to, I think, part of Senator Wilson's question too, there's a revision of the transmission plan. So there's no transmission plan that's in place and it's in place forever. When a new asset such as energy storage is brought on to the grid, either authorized by the PSC through this process of analyzing the comparison with I call it generation must run and other opportunities, and the commission directs it, then it's in ground. You know, there's iron in the ground, and PJM has to remodel its transmission around that. Now, there might be, in the consequence of remodeling its transmission around that, some unintended costs that, you know, that transmission owners might expect to recover. But but there is a remodeling of the transmission system once the iron is in the ground based on a decision by the PSC or by PJM.
What is the timeline to build a system to replace Brandon Shores? I mean, how is that a 6-month project? Is that a year and a half from once PSC says, okay, go do it? Because I imagine there has to be planning, construction, implementation, testing. How long is that timeline?
Well, I think that would be all in the proposals that would be coming in. So the utility that presents the proposal for the energy storage would have to put all of that in front of the commission with the timelines associated with the implementation.
Do we have any today timeline? What you think it might?
We don't have any today. I think the witness from TELUS might have some information about what their timelines were with respect to the project that was going to be used to displace the reliability must run for Brandon Shores.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, Senator Brooks, or just brief.
Yeah, the one thing I would add is building an energy storage facility. The timelines there would really be getting the interconnection agreements. So not that it's my habit to take up for the utilities, but I'd say the benefit of this bill is if a utility is working with Brandon Shores, then they already have 1,300 megawatts of interconnection, and then they can look to locate the storage there and expedite the process. But to actually bring on storage technology, I mean, 6 months to a year without permitting. So that's, you know, those PJM, PSC approvals would add to that.
Okay, Senator Brooks.
Thanks, Chair. Delegate Charkudian. Quick question on this RMR. Is this with Brandon Shores? Is this for capacity or generation? And we know that I think an RMR is going to cost about 16 times more than what you normally would pay for electrons. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's my understanding that the RMR, so the RMR is to be ready to provide peaker plant electrons.
Right.
Right. I think the fact that they are retiring suggests that they are no longer able to pencil with what they are able to do in the capacity market. And so they're not going to be selling into the capacity market. They're only going to be an RMR facility. So they'll no longer be getting capacity revenue. They'll only be an RMR facility, which means we'll also have to pay on top of the RMR money for capacity.
Right.
But I think they've struggled to meet the capacity requirements. I think that's a piece of why they are, why they're in the economics are complicated for it. But this would, the RMR is for to actually run in peak periods. It's not for capacity. I think they're not they wouldn't be able to be in the capacity market anymore. They're not succeeding in penciling with the capacity payments.
I see. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks, Chair.
Any additional questions for Delegate Charkudian or the panel? Okay. Seeing none, thank
you
you.
very much.
That concludes bill hearing on Senate Bill 1112. Okay, I wasn't here at the beginning. I was over in the House presenting bills. I don't know the order in which people walked in, but let's go with, okay. No, okay, well, here, let's get Delegate Stein, because I think, I don't want E and T to be completely rudderless. I think, Chair Corman's coming over here, and then I see you've got 3 sponsor-only bills. And then, I see half of the E and T, committee here, so I'm a little concerned. So if we can take, Speaker Pro Tem's 3 bills next, and then we'll go, after that. Okay, so. Okay, fair enough. Okay. Delegate Stein, we've got 3 bills on the list from you. Do you want to start with House Bill 807? And then
Sure.
we'll just go through the list here.
Sure.
Okay?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and committee members. For the record, Delegate Dana Stein on House Bill 807, which deals with submerged aquatic vegetation, or SAV. I'll try not to use the acronym too much in my presentation, but submerged aquatic vegetation are grasses, algae, and other plants that grow underwater. They provide a lot of benefits to the bay. They provide habitat for fish, other critters, and they prevent erosion, remove sediment, and absorb nutrients. The Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement in 2014 set a goal of restoring 185,000 total acres of SAV Baywide, with 130,000 acres to be restored by 2025. Unfortunately, we're far behind that goal, so it makes it even more important to protect existing SAV beds and their seed banks. Now, since 2001, the Department of Natural Resources has mapped SAV protection zones in the bay using the Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences annual aerial flyover survey to delineate the zones. But the cost of these surveys is increasing, and results are dependent on weather and water clarity, and sometimes it can take up to a year to get results. So this bill, which has incorporated the department's amendment, enables DNR to use any DNR approved survey that meets certain criteria specified in the bill. And these alternative surveys could be satellite or drone imagery and machine learning assisted processing. Also under the bill, DNR is to study and report on the implications and feasibility of using these alternative methods. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I urge a favorable report.
Okay, any questions for the sponsor, Delegate Stein, Vice Chair of Environment and Transportation Committee? Okay, seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on House Bill 807. Let's just go through your other 2, House Bill 990, and then we're going to go to Delegate Love's Bill 1101 after these 2. Okay, so go to again, House Bill 990 is next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, committee members. House Bill 990 would bring the manufacturing sector under the scope of the greenhouse gas law, subject to certain exceptions. As amended, there was no debate in either House committee about the bill or on the House floor, and there was a strong vote in support of the final bill in the House, 103 to 35. Now, the first time we committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions was in 2009 with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act. It authorized MDE to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from all sectors of the economy with one exception, and that was the manufacturing sector. And when we renewed and expanded our climate goals in 2016 and 2022, we maintained this exemption for the manufacturing sector. But according to the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, we are the only state with a climate plan that exempts the manufacturing sector from meeting particular emission goals. This exemption is also in conflict with the state's climate pollution reduction plan, which was commissioned and released by MDE last year, which calls for an all of society or all of economy approach to meet our climate goals. And this exemption is also inconsistent with a bill that we passed last year that requires the state to place upper limits on the emissions of concrete and cement mixes that are used in state projects. So the bill would modify the exemption of manufacturing. It's based on a recommendation of the Commission on Climate Change that was approved by a vote of 18-1. It would do a few things. It would enable MDE to consider emission reductions from manufacturers that come to Maryland after 2023. With respect to cement manufacturers, it removes the exemption for existing cement manufacturers, given their large contribution to the state's greenhouse gas emissions. And it allows MDE with respect to existing manufacturers other than cement manufacturers to regulate emissions, provided the regulations do not require a reduction in emissions below 2023 levels or a substantial increase in costs above 2023 costs. Cement manufacturers are brought under the regulation, would be brought under MDE regulation because the two highest emitting manufacturing facilities in the state are cement manufacturing plants. Fortunately, the cement industry has committed to net zero emissions by 2050. One of the plants has already reduced emissions through fuel switching. And when the bill was under consideration in the House, we worked with the cement industry to come up with an amendment that is reflected in the bill before you, which would require MDE in consideration of any regulation that affects cement production to consider a number of factors. For example, the extent to which the industry is energy intensive. It would also require MDE to provide credit for early action items, early action investments that have been made by the industry already to reduce emissions and other factors. And it specifically says that MDE must consult with cement manufacturers and other stakeholders. So with that amendment, Mr. Chairman, there was no opposition to the legislation in the House, and I urge a favorable report.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the sponsor, Delegate Stein? Okay, seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on House Bill 990. And then finally, House Bill 1266. Back to you, Delegate Stein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, committee members. We passed what was called the Clean Water Commerce Act back in 2021. It was introduced on behalf of the Maryland delegation of the Chesapeake Bay Commission. The purpose of the act was to improve upon a program first started in 2017, which facilitated the purchase of pollution reductions by the state to meet our Bay cleanup goals at the lowest possible price point. The intent was to achieve the largest bang for the buck to meet our obligations under the Bay's TMDL, total maximum daily load. However, in implementing the program last year, MDE has interpreted language in the bill in a manner that we believe was inconsistent with the original intent of the sponsors by requiring that payments under any approved contract be paid out equally over the useful life of the project, which can be as long as 20 years. Given that most projects have large upfront capital costs, such an equal pay schedule, again, potentially over a long period of time, has the effect of increasing capital costs because you have to requires financing of that large upfront cost. And the increasing of the cost is really the exact opposite of what was the bill's purpose. So based on this interpretation, MDE has rejected the most cost-effective proposals it received during the most recent bidding process. MDE may be funding proposals that it deems to be cost-effective, but the most cost-effective ones are not funded. So this bill seeks to clarify the original objective of the legislation by adding language relating to the payment schedules allowed, and is brought by the Maryland members of the Chesapeake Bay Commission. Senator Gazzoni and Senator Elfreth have the cross-file SB 1144, and Delegates Love and Delegate Ivy are co-sponsors of this bill. And I want to emphasize that the language in this bill is consistent with how pay-performance contracts are used in some parts of Maryland and throughout the country. Substantial payments are made following the initial construction of a project, and a lesser percentage is paid out over the project's life to ensure ongoing maintenance and performance by the contractor. And with amendments that were added, we did say that DNR could require, in order to ensure achievement of environmental outcomes, a minimum final payment, and for a contract above a certain size, additional financial protections such as a letter of credit, insurance instrument, or a performance bond. So with that, Mr. Chairman, urge a favorable report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Delegate Stein? Seeing none, that concludes bill hearing on House Bill
Thank you very much.
1266. Okay, Delegate Love, why don't you come back up? I understand that you were first up, but we were waiting. Senator Augustine has an interest in this bill, and we were waiting for him to come back. He's back. So let's go back to House Bill 1101, and we've got one witness signed up favorable with amendment, Betsy Nicholas. If you wanted to bring her up, was there And again, I think that's the only one we have, and then we have one panel of unfavorable. So it's all yours, Delegate Love, House Bill 1101.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for putting me up in the beginning and then waiting for this so my cross-file Senator Augustine could be here for this presentation. I'm not going to take a lot of your time because you all have heard this bill before. You've had the presentation, but just to refresh your recollection, this is a bill that is going to put people in Maryland back in the same position that they were in a year ago, prior to the United States Supreme Court deciding Sackett versus EPA. So prior to Sackett, individuals in Maryland could sue in federal court to protect waters in Maryland. After Sackett, they've lost a part of that ability: ephemeral streams, wetlands, intermittent streams. So the bill you have before you, it's been amended to narrow it and make it very clear that the only thing that we are doing is restoring the pre-Sackett legal landscape. So there are a couple of folks that have come in opposition, and there are a couple of things that I want to address. Well, actually, before I do that, you have a couple of sponsor amendments. Most of them, actually, all of them are technical. The bulk of them are just cleaning up some language. One that may not seem technical, but is technical, we put in political subdivision. So somebody that could be a defendant, a person, or political subdivision. It used to say or governmental entity. And in discussions with MDE, we realized that political subdivision was the correct language. To be clear, this is as it was under Sackett, or pre-Sackett, because in federal law, under the Clean Water Act, person included governmental entity. So we are not adding anything here. Happy to answer any questions on that if you have them. But I did just want to address the two opposition, the Maryland Municipal Stormwater Association and the Maryland Association of Municipal Wastewater Agencies. They have 3 points. The first one, lawsuits are costly for localities. I don't know how to say this without being disrespectful, but if you pollute, then you need to be held responsible. Quite frankly, there haven't been a lot of lawsuits. And Betsy Nicholas went back and did an analysis. There have been 2 a year for the last 10 years. So these are not a lot of lawsuits. This is not a lot of liability. But remember, you're only being sued if you are polluting our waters, okay? Second, they say HB 1101 is unfair to potential defendants because of the language that it says the court can award costs to a prevailing or substantially prevailing party, but only for a substantially prevailing defendant if the plaintiff's claim was frivolous, unreasonable, or groundless. That is current federal law. That is how all the federal courts interpret the language that is in federal law. So we are not changing anything. We are not making it unfair to defendants. We are being exactly the way the federal courts say this should be. And the final thing, citizens can readily participate in enforcement cases. They have an intervention right. That was a bill that we passed several years ago. That was actually my bill in 2021. But they've lost the right to sue under Sackett for these really important waters. So that's actually not true. They can intervene, but they can't bring the lawsuits. And it's really important for them to be able to bring the lawsuits because these are the people that are on the ground. These are the people that know the local waters, and they are helping MDE do their job. MDE can't do all of the enforcement actions. They just don't have the capacity to bring all the suits or the capacity to know all the pollution that's going on. So I went longer than I said I would, but I thank you for your attention. And I respectfully request a favorable report.
Okay, thank you. We've got your lone witness. We've got Ms. Nicholas. You're going to be on the 2-minute clock, so you're signed up favorable with amendments. Okay. Why don't
Thank you.
discuss?
My name is Betsy Nicholas. I'm Vice President of Programs for Potomac Riverkeeper Network. We have 3 riverkeepers who work in the field in different parts of our gigantic watershed. And I just wanted to address again some of the opposition that we've heard to this bill. The Clean Water Act is really an immensely popular federal law. We had this unfortunate Sackett decision that really cut back jurisdiction. But the reason the Clean Water Act is popular is because it has saved our waterways. That we went from a time where we had rivers on fire to having waterways that we can swim and fish in, and we always depend on these waterways for drinking. The Potomac River serves as drinking water supply for 6 million people. So the pollution that gets into these waterways have a really significant impact on residents, on businesses, and on the health of the public. We have heard from the opposition a lot of concern that this bill could be used to delay projects. That simply isn't true. There are only 2 types of actions that you can bring under the law as provided, under this bill as provided and narrowed in scope. One is discharging water pollution in violation of your permit. The second is discharging water pollution without a permit when you were required to have one. There's no delaying projects, there's no land use, there's no zoning. None of these things are relevant. You'll also hear from opposition about different types of standing and saying there's other ways that this could be brought. That, again, is not true. You cannot bring Clean Water Act violations or water pollution discharge permits under common law, under zoning, under land use. Local governments are only subject to this law if they are operating a facility that has a permit under the Water Pollution Control Program. So ask for a favorable report from this committee. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for Delegate Love or Ms. Nicholas on this piece of legislation? Seeing none, thank you both. Okay, we do have, again, this is limited testimony today. It's a limited bill hearing. We do have 3 unfavorables. I'll call those 3 up. Lisa Oceanhurt, Tom Ballantyne, and Michael Powell. And that'll be the extent of the witnesses, and then we'll move back to the other House bills. So who wants to lead off? You guys can
Your
pick.
permission, Mr. Chair,
Okay.
I'll do that.
Okay, Mr. Ballantyne, and again, each of you are going to be on the 2-minute clock.
Okay.
So you lead off, Mr. Ballantyne.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Tom Ballantyne with NIOP Maryland. We're a commercial real estate trade association here in opposition to House Bill 1101. This for us is about enforcement, not about protection of the resource. That's already done through regulatory measures. And the enforcement today is done through state agencies and local agencies. They operate in the public interest. They use their discretion in enforcement decisions, and they're subject to oversight by General Assembly and local elected officials. In 2021, we supported the bill sponsors House Bill 76, which allowed individuals and associations who meet the federal standing threshold to intervene in enforcement actions that are initiated by MDE and state courts. This bill gives those same parties the right to independently initiate those enforcement actions against permit holders. And these actions don't have to show that there's any environmental harm in order to get into court. They just need to show that there's a potential for a future impact on their aesthetic or environmental interests. And the amendments that delete references to those phrases don't change the application of the federal definition to the cases that would be generated by this bill. The bill exposes permit holders to what we think is unreasonable litigation risks. A stormwater discharge to a roadside ditch is within the scope of this bill. We think violations should be enforced by MDE and local agencies that have issued the permits, not by independent civil suits. The other thing that is of concern to us is that a permit holder is going to have to defend their performance under the permit, as well as whether the permit was correctly issued in the first place. And the agencies that issued the permit and enforce it don't have to be a party to the proceeding. So for those reasons, we request your unfavorable report.
Thank you, Mr. Ballantyne. Why don't you go next? And again, each will be on the 2-minute clock, but tell us who you are first, okay?
Sure. Chairman Feldman, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of the committee. My name is Lisa Oxenhurt, and I'm here today on behalf of MML and MACO and MAMWA and MAMSA, which are the state's wastewater and stormwater associations, to oppose House Bill 1101. First, I want to say thank you to Delegate Love and Senator Augustine. We just aren't there yet with this bill. I fear that House Bill 101 will open a door to allow state court citizen lawsuits against localities against a backdrop that has been a source of confusion for decades. For example, a citizen may sue in state court because of an alleged discharge into an intermittent stream or a disconnected wetland. We may also see the United States Environmental Protection Agency also sue in federal court because it believes the stream has a relatively permanent flow or the wetland is connected to a jurisdictional water. These are very hard calls for even an expert to make. Unfortunately, localities, including my clients who are wastewater plants and stormwater managers, could be stuck in the middle defending two cases, one in state court and one in federal court. In addition, in response to earlier comments that MDE can't be everywhere, I respectfully draw your attention to House Bill 649 from 2022, which increases the number of inspections by MDE to monthly or quarterly for certain wastewater plants and other permittees. MDE also has a new website that provides citizen complaints and enforcement documents for anybody who wants to see them. And MDE has a new enhanced enforcement document just for wastewater treatment plants. So there's a lot going on at the state with regard to water inspections and enforcement issues that aren't being considered by the advocates to House Bill 1101. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Mr. Powell.
Yeah, Michael Powell here on behalf of the Maryland Home Builders. We are not unsympathetic to the desire to look at the Supreme Court opinion in Sackett and try to reverse it, but this is trying to put a square peg in a round hole. This is trying to create the ability for people to be sued in state court, and it's not going to match what the federal courts used to have. As an example, under the old pre-Sackett rule, things like ditches that were not in tributaries, and where ephemeral streams flooded converted croplands, ornamental wastewaters, municipal sewage treatment lagoons were not something you could sue in federal court on. That none of those exemptions are here. And it's understandable. Those definitions and exemptions were developed over a long and complicated back and forth with the Corps of Engineers and the EPA trying to work out what they considered navigable waters of the United States are. We've never had those kind of debates here. We've never had to define what is a navigable water and not, and what is not, because what is the waters of the state of Maryland are clear. What this amounts to is the ability for a private citizen to decide that what the state is doing is not enough and simply sue. And it is absolutely true that this could be abused by a citizen who wanted to stop a development. Every single development has to have a stormwater permit. It's called a general stormwater permit. And the bill authorizes any individual, even if they just got an aesthetic reason, they think it affects something that they see, that's in federal standing, they can go to court and seek an injunction to stop the development because they say stormwater is entering an ephemeral stream. An ephemeral stream is a stream that only contains water when it rains, and therefore stop the development. And with that, we would ask for an unfavorable report.
Okay, we're going to go to Senator Augustine.
Thank you, Chair Feldman. Mr. Ballantyne, how many actions were taken against your clients in 2023 as it pertains to ephemeral streams and wetlands?
Of course, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but I can look into it for you. I think the bigger question that maybe you're getting at is how often will this be used? And I would just look to the fiscal note.
Well, that's actually not where I'm going with that. Where I'm asking you is this. The law that the Supreme Court changed the definition of the waters of the United States. And so with this now amended, very narrow bill, we're simply putting back what was there before, which was the ability to have suits that related to discharge or water pollution for those who have permits and those without permits in these very narrow circumstances. And so I was asking you, how many of your clients in the past faced these kinds of suits?
I don't know the answer today. But MDE anticipates needing one full AG, full-time AG to answer the 60-day notice and the other provisions that relate to the activities that they expect from this bill. And that would be
Okay,
significant.
so I'm gonna ask you as well, I don't want to mispronounce your last name.
Ms. Oxenhurt. Yes. it's
Oxenhurt. I
Yes,
don't want to
sir.
mispronounce your last name. Same thing. How many actions and as it pertains to the ephemeral streams and wetlands that have been moved out of Sackett? With
Yeah,
Sackett?
I actually don't know the answer either, but I could find out, how many of my permittees are impacted by discharging into these kinds of waters. Certainly not the same as, say, a construction site, because mine are wastewater plants and MS4s.
Okay, and then I would ask you all, do you think that, again, that folks are able to be basically everywhere as it pertains to identifying water pollution? And are you guys just comfortable with our waters being polluted?
If the question is.
I'm not asking you. I'll ask Mr. Ballantyne that.
Of course not. We supported the right of intervention. We supported MDE's bill to increase fines and broaden administrative inspections.
So
We-
you would agree that we want to protect our waterways and that they're very important? Would you agree?
Yes, but it's an MDE function. It's not a citizen suit function.
How many people are in MDE that are doing these inspections? That are able to do it, that are able to get around our state?
I think that's a question for MDE,
I would have,
Senator.
are you aware that MDE is supportive of this bill and has helped to draft and put this thing together with us?
Yes,
Okay, so MDE understands, it seems, a need for this additional help and making sure this was very narrowly focused in order to be able to provide that. So would you agree then that they feel that this would be beneficial?
we disagree that it's narrow. And we don't think it will, in the end, be beneficial.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Senator Carozza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Oskenhart,
Yes.
I want to make sure I understand. You're representing Maryland Association of Counties, Maryland Municipal League, and the Maryland Association of Municipal Wastewater Agencies.
Yes, ma'am. We also have a stormwater association.
And the Stormwater Association. Thank you. What I think I heard your testimony is that that there, I guess you brought up the possibility, I think all three of you, of the multiple lawsuits, which I guess given who you represent, those four organizations, what would the impact be on local jurisdictions? And if it's not through these lawsuits, do you see that then as a function of the Maryland Department of the Environment?
Well, so I think our fear is, because this is I understand the Sackett opinion, it looks very clean, what they decided, but in practice, I think it's a lot harder, and I'm not a wetlands expert by any stretch, but it's a lot harder to actually decide whether a water is jurisdictional under the federal law or not. So the concern is that we may have a citizen who doesn't think it is. We may have the federal government that thinks it is a jurisdictional water, and we may end up in state court and federal court on the same sort of allegation regarding a water body that's not clear which side of the line it's on, so to speak, after Sackett. And that costs, obviously, localities time, expense. It puts jurisdictional decisions about very technical, sort of just jurisdictional decisions at the state court level. It's concerning. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
So what I'm
exactly,
hearing
but-
is it's pretty complex, which could lead to the multiple lawsuits,
right,
which then could lead to translating into, for these local jurisdictions, municipalities
Yes.
and counties, which I represent 11 municipalities and 3 counties, there could be significant costs to these jurisdictions.
Yes, ma'am. And I'll just say it took 8+ years for the Supreme Court to finally wrap their heads around whether one wetland was jurisdictional in the Sackett case. These are not easy matters to sort of determine from a technical perspective,
Which is
even
why
though.
they would lead to lawsuits.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Okay, any additional questions for the panel? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 1101. We're going to now go to some of the back to our house colleagues. And I'm not doing this because she's my district mate, but because according to Lemuria, she came in here first, but we're going to go to Delegate Chi and House Bill 1055. And Delegate Chi, welcome. And so what you take the time you need to present House Bill 1055.
Thank you very much. It gives me great pleasure to say good afternoon, Mr. Chair, my great Senator Chair Feldman, and the members of the Triple E Committee. I am Delegate Lily Chi here to present HB 1055, which requires, it's a much simpler bill than everything you have heard so far, by the way, okay? Which requires the state and local government entities to report their annual road salt use to the Maryland Department of the Environment. So the goal is, of course, to promote smart salting on our roads. For background, excessive road salt is a serious and a growing problem for our health and the environment. There have been plenty of studies and reports in recent years, especially including in places like the New York Times and the Washington Post about this issue. While salt is cost effective in preventing snow accumulation on our roads, oversalting has multiple harmful impacts on our infrastructure, including bridges, roads, wildlife, soil, and human health, because salt is very hard to remove from our drinking water. According to WSSC, over the past 30 years, there has been 180% increase in salt in the Patuxent River and 104% increase in Potomac River, two main sources of drinking water for many Marylanders. And we can only estimate that these are similar numbers in other waterways in our state. So over the past 3 years, my office has been working closely with the Maryland Department of the Environment to mitigate oversalting and raise awareness about road salt. I'm pleased to share that MDE has since set up a training program for contractors doing business in Maryland to raise awareness, to get trained on proper salting or smart salting. So this bill is the next step, is to simply track the actual salt usage by government entities who are among the largest users of road salt applications. Currently, only phase 1 MS4 permit holders, which are the 5 largest jurisdictions in Maryland. We're talking about Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Anne Arundel County, Baltimore County, and Baltimore City. Only these 5 jurisdictions are required to submit salt use data to MDE. So this bill would essentially make sure all of the government entities, the state agencies, counties, and municipalities would report their salt use data annually. With this bill, for example, we would know that within Montgomery County, the city of Rockville and the city of Gaithersburg, which are next to each other in our vice chair's jurisdiction, District 17, are very different in the amount of salt they use. One city used 3,200 pounds of salt, while the other used just a little over 1,000 pounds of salt for the same weather conditions in the same year. So I want to point out that as amended, this bill only applies to collecting data from government entities without putting the burden on the businesses, because that's where we start, by setting an example, by raising awareness. So we've struck the language about collecting data on salt application at schools, institutions of higher learning, public parks, and the private contractors. And also to make it easier for smaller communities to collect the data, the amendment would include a total yearly salt usage in aggregate to be the kind of point of data to report, rather than single lane miles. So in summary, this is a simple bill that MDE and the local communities can handle with current resources as confirmed by MDE. And with our amendment, we also took care of the concern by MML about how easy it is to report. So with that, I urge a favorable report, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Delegate Chi? We've got Senator Gallion and Vice Chair Kagan. Okay,
Thank you, Mr.
Senator
Chair. Good afternoon, Delegate. So I actually have done some salting through a contract work with state highways, and it seems that they already they're tracking, they keep track of how much salt, I mean, each scoop that's dumped in the truck and then how much you return to the salt dome. So it seems like this data is probably already there, and also so they know how much to reorder for the next year, I guess. So does this bill just make it so that data is just reported to MDE? It's not already?
Right, it's not already reported. As I mentioned, only 5 largest jurisdictions, 4 largest county plus Baltimore City are currently reporting as required. The rest of them, they don't really report to MDE, so we don't have centralized data point to know how much everybody's using. And as I mentioned in my example, some municipalities use 3 times more than others. And I think by collecting data, we kind of raise awareness about that.
Yeah. And even 15 years ago, they used to have classes where contractors would go and talk about sensible salting practices, and you don't want to use more than you need to, for sure.
That's right. One
other quick question. Is salt brine included in this? Because we're seeing more and more of that where they pre-treat the roads and it's that solution. And it's honestly, I've heard from other contractors that it puts a lot of wear and tear on equipment because it really rusts equipment up. So is salt brine included in this?
It's not we did not specify the types. This is a pretty general kind of bill. We did not specify salt brine.
Okay, Vice Chair Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Shi, welcome back and thank you for your leadership on this issue. We worked on this bill several years ago, and I'm sorry I was late. I had 3 bills in the House. I have 2 quick questions. One is, it indicates in our committee testimony that MML was opposed, and that was, and I was just wondering, since this is a sponsor only hearing, could you speak to that? And then I have one more question.
Sure, happy to. So MML's opposition was mostly out of the concern that it would be putting burden on the small municipalities because we're measuring single lane mile as the bill officially was drafted. So we took out that language to just say report aggregate, how much you purchased and how much you applied. That's it. Yeah.
Okay. And then my second question, I know that we are both committed to transparency in government. So everybody reports their information. Then what? Will it be put on a website? Will there be a report? Because one of the whole differences, you gave a great example between Gaithersburg and Rockville. Seems like peer pressure is going to help make a difference because we know that salt is terrible and gets into our waterways and hurts the wildlife and all of that. But unless that information is public, it won't have that effect. What is your hope that will happen if this bill passes as it is right now? What's the outcome that will make things better?
Thank you. Well, I think a couple of things. One is to raise awareness by asking for the data. Hopefully, local communities will be more cognizant of that and use less or just enough. And also, I think it will give us some data points to drive further policies to see where we can, be smarter in mitigating it.
Is it clear, and I'm in the bill, is it clear that we're going to have access to it and that the public and advocates will have access to it? Because it doesn't seem to be in here.
Yeah, we did not specify in this bill to say how we can have, the public can have access to the data once it's reported to MDE. And if the committee wants to add some language to clarify that, I welcome that. But the understanding is the legislature will have access to such data since it's our bill that we requested MDE to collect. And we can certainly have access to that if we want to.
I might need to check with legal counsel on that assumption. I just want to make sure, but I believe that it will be more effective if there were more visibility, more transparency. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, any additional questions for our sponsor, Delegate Shi? Okay, seeing none, thank you. That concludes our bill hearing on House Bill 1055, and I'm just going to go to the list I was given about who came first. So we've got Delegate Lehman, then Delegate Guyton, Delegate Ruth in that order. Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am here to talk about state collection of yard waste. So for the record, I am Delegate Mary Lehman. Good afternoon, EEE members. I am here asking for your favorable support of House Bill 173, a bill that prohibits state employees and contractors from using single-use plastic bags to collect yard waste on state lands and along state highways. Instead of single-use plastic bags, the bill requires that state employees and contractors use either a compostable paper bag or a container that will not be discarded with the yard waste. In other words, a reusable container. Under current Maryland law, there are no restrictions on the employment of single-use plastic bags for yard waste collection on the grounds of state buildings or along highways. So House Bill 173 ensures that yard waste collected on state lands and along highways is disposed of in a more environmentally conscious manner. According to the World Wildlife Fund, plastic bags take up to 20 years to break down in a landfill. And if a plastic bag ends up going to a composting facility that takes both yard waste and food waste, the plastic bags can be shredded along with the yard waste by the machinery. That involves a lot of disintegrating plastic within the, mixed into the compost. And so the facility would either have to invest in imperfect plastic screening technology to avoid this, which adds time and cost to an already slow process, or to simply produce a contaminated product, which obviously is not desirable. So the House bill was amended in two ways. First of all, to clarify that compostable bags must be made of paper, and then to allow for one kind of unusual exception, something I had never heard of, but DNR brought to my attention. So DNR uses heavy-duty black plastic bags in very limited circumstances for the removal of noxious weeds and invasives. The reason for that is, I don't know the exact science, but apparently black plastic bags get very hot, especially in the sun, and they sort of have a suffocating effect on these invasive plants, and ensure that once they are removed from the ground and in these bags, that they die off, that there's no chance of them spreading in any way. So DNR did ask for that narrow exemption, and we of course agreed to it. I'm going to conclude by saying that over 1/3 of our counties have already enacted similar policies for residential yard waste collection, and it's really time for the state to operate under the same standards. And with that, I thank you for your consideration and ask for a favorable report.
Okay, questions for Delegate Lehman on House Bill 173? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 173.
Thank
And
you.
next, we're going to go to Delegate Guyton on House Bill 1147. Delegate Guyton, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Education, Energy, and Environment Committee. For the record, I am Delegate Michelle Guyton from District 42B in Baltimore County, and I am here to respectfully request a favorable report from you today on House Bill 1147. 1147 prohibits the installation of surfacing materials that contain dangerous levels of lead and PFAS, excuse me, Madam Vice Chair, polyfluoroalkyl substances, but I would love to be able to use that acronym moving forward, PFAS, on public playground surfaces in our state. And you may be just as surprised as I was when I heard that in fact, Maryland does not regulate toxic substances on our public playgrounds. And instead we do allow, up until now, small children to crawl around on these substances, and in some cases, put them in their mouths that are actually full of lead and PFAS. So I am not going to try to convince you that these substances are dangerous for either children or for the environment, because I do applaud the work that this committee has done in the past few years on these issues, as has mine over on the House side. House Bill 1147 requires that all new playgrounds, so this is only prospective, I'm not asking anyone to go back and tear up anything, and I think that's a very important point, that all new playgrounds and significant renovations of surfacing materials on playgrounds provide certification from the manufacturer that these products are toxin-free from those two toxins, lead and PFAS, and that there was no intentional addition of PFAS in the manufacturing process of these substances. So this is consistent with past legislation that this committee has put forward and passed. And it was actually modeled, this language particularly, was modeled after the George Walter Taylor Act, which is successfully, hopefully, keeping PFAS out of firefighting foam, carpets, and other materials in the state of Maryland. So just so you know where this came from, the genesis of this legislation lies in 2016. Senator Cory Booker and Bob Menendez called for a Senate investigation on the health and environmental effects of chrome rubber. Right. After that investigation showed significant hazards, Washington, D.C., smartly, in my opinion, started testing their playgrounds. Right. They found that a high number of them contained lead and PFAS. And after that report came out, parents in Montgomery County started pushing testing in their own areas, in their own playgrounds. And that resulted in the closure of 21 playgrounds in the area and repairs to over 300 others who tested high for significantly dangerous levels of lead and PFAS in these areas that our most vulnerable citizens are playing. This legislation, and again, I'll say this twice, does not impact turf playing fields. It does not impact turf playing fields. In fact, specifically, we had to define the term playground in state code. There was no legal definition for that. And also specified that surfacing materials must come into direct contact with skin, the ones that we are talking about. So I met with a lot of stakeholders. This bill was actually brought to me by Free State PTA. And initially we did have some opposition on the House side. So I don't know how far back you go in your records, but there were letters of opposition from both MACO and MLL. They have come to a beautiful kumbaya moment, and we have dealt with all of their concerns with the amendments that we put on in our House committee, and there is no opposition currently to this legislation. So I've also heard and had testimony from experts in this field who build the playgrounds, including Maryland Recreation and Parks. And we are confident that this legislation will not impede our ability to build quality, safe, accessible and inclusive playgrounds. And I'm also very concerned as a developmental psychologist who works with kids who have disabilities that we don't make their life less fun. So we can do all of this. They can have accessible, inclusive, and safe playgrounds with the passage of House Bill 1147. And so I ask for a favorable report.
Okay, Vice Chair Kagan has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Delegate Guyton, thank you. And you've been a leader on these issues for a long time, so appreciate it. I was looking already at MML and MACO, Maryland Municipal League, and the Maryland Association of Counties and their opposition. I am in right now the Maryland Association of Counties letter, and I'm just doing a quick search. It does not look like you satisfied all of the objections. And I wonder if that was an oversight or whether that was on purpose. We'll do this one, but not that one, and then I can get into specifics if I'm not clear.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that statement and that question. It is our understanding that we have, and they actually said that they would speak to this committee to that effect, which is why we didn't have any opposition for today's.
Okay.
Do we have Dominic or anyone from MACO here?
Dominic was here
Yes.
earlier. So in their testimony, they wanted to strike references to use and replace with install. And the word install is in the bill 4 times. And one is a purpose paragraph, which is irrelevant, obviously. But there is a case where it's on page 2, lines 7 through 9. It says used or installed. And so that language is still there. They also asked for a delayed effective date from October 1 of 2024 to January 1 of 2026 to give county partners in the private sector adequate time to adjust any products or services. And from my reading of the reprint of the amended bill, the effective date is still October 1 of 2024, and that was not changed.
Thank you. Vice Chair, that surprises me because we've had these conversations with them, and I was guaranteed that they actually at this point were taking no stance on the bill at all, or we would have had people here to on, as testimony. So that's why we were told there was no opposition to this bill.
Okay.
We did actually go back, and because we were not going retroactively, but prospectively for this bill, it was my understanding that they were okay with the effective date because the effective date was going to deal only with contracts signed after that date. So anything that was currently in the works could continue, although I don't like that either personally from a health and environmental standpoint. It may be that drafting missed that one word of use. I'm fine if we take that out. That looks like a drafting mistake.
Okay, well, we can obviously easily get an update from Mako and MML.
Please do, because that is very surprising to me. It's
Thank
not.
you, Delegate. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Okay, any additional questions for Delegate Guyton? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on 1147. We're going to go now to Delegate Ruth on House Bill 841.
Thank you so
Then we'll go to the just for those of you in the, we'll go to the MDE Bill 245 after this. So Delegate Ruth, it's take the time you need to present House Bill 841.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Sheila Ruth presenting House Bill 841. Think back to what you had for breakfast this morning. Whatever you had, it's probably a good chance that you also consumed a fair amount of micro and nanoplastics. Plastic breaks down into these tiny particles, and these particles are now everywhere. They've been found on Mount Everest, in the oceans, the human blood, air, lungs, placentas, and they may even cross the blood-brain barrier. And so there is still research being done on the health impacts of micro and nanoplastics, but there is adequate evidence that they are not only vectors for toxic chemicals, but that they cause health impacts themselves. There was last year a study done, a report released by the Minderoo-Monaco Commission, which showed that plastics had health impacts at every stage of their life cycle, from extraction to disposal. You may also probably consume some phthalates today in your food. Phthalates are plasticizers, and they are also endocrine disruptors. So they have reproductive health impacts, as well as other impacts such as insulin resistance, diabetes, blood pressure, and other things. Last month, Consumer Reports tested a bunch of different foods and found phthalates in just about every food they tested, even those that were not packaged in plastic. So plastic has a huge impact on our environment and on our health. And it's something that we need to do something about. Now, this committee and my committee and the entire General Assembly have been working to increase the percentage of plastic that's recycled. That's very important work, and it needs to continue. But we sometimes forget the first part of it. It used to be reduce, reuse, recycle. I think we focus a little bit too much on the recycle part, and we need to figure out how to reduce as well. Not only that, there has been research. A recent study found that recycled plastic actually has more chemicals than virgin plastic. And also that recycling process can release microplastics as well. So recycling is important, but it's not a perfect solution, and we need to find ways to reduce plastic as well. This is a bill that has a couple of very simple solutions. There's two things. First of all, under the International Plumbing Code, buildings are already, many different types of buildings are already required to install water fountains, depending on what type of building and the capacity of the building. All this bill does is it says any building that's already required under the International Plumbing Code to install water fountains must also either install water bottle refill stations or water fountains with water bottle refill stations incorporated into them. Because if you, like me, carry around a water bottle, you can't always fit them into the water fountain that's got a little thing this high. So it requires at least 10 inches of clearance to fill a water bottle. The fiscal note said that they did research and that there are plenty of options available and that they're comparable in price to water fountains without the water bottle refill stations. So there's really no fiscal impact to this. This is similar to bills that have been passed in several other states, including Illinois and Washington State last year. And the Department of Labor, which oversees the plumbing code, is also fine with it. The second part of this requires the Maryland Department of the Environment to survey the quantity and volume of water bottles purchased by state government units and higher education institutions, and to make recommendations about alternative methods of providing drinking water. As a state, we should set the model and really be leaders in this effort. This doesn't require
any kind of reduction of water bottle. It's just collecting information. We need to know what the state is actually using so we can figure out if there's anything we want to adjust or need to adjust and how we might be able to do that. And so with that, I would ask for a favorable report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, do we have any questions for Delegate Ruth on this piece of legislation? Okay, seeing none, thank you for your testimony. That concludes bill hearing on House Bill 841. Let's now go to House Bill 245. Mr. Knapp, you want to come up here on behalf of MDE and whoever else you want to bring up? We've got yourself and whoever else is going to introduce themselves. So again, we're on House Bill 245. This is a departmental bill from the Department of the Environment. Whoever wants to lead off.
Good afternoon.
Yeah.
For the record, my name is Suzanne Dorsey. I'm the Deputy Secretary here on behalf of Secretary McElwain, who a short while
And we're not going to
ago-
put you on the clock as a department bill. Okay, so go on.
Thank you. Do you want to start?
Go ahead, please.
Okay. On behalf of Secretary McElwain, who cut short a trip to be here and testify in front of you, I apologize. A short while ago, I left her at the command center at the base of the bridge. And so I leave her with our emergency response team to make sure that we're responsive to the emergency and the tragedy that our state is experiencing right now. The bill before you addresses one of the most pressing issues that Secretary McElwain has faced since she started, which is how do we adequately fund the Maryland Department of the Environment? Governor Moore addressed some of our staffing shortfalls in his first budget, but we still need a stable and consistent revenue source so we can ensure that Marylanders have access to clean water, healthy air, and vibrant land. We also need to be responsive to the needs of our business communities and residents in terms of providing reasonable turnaround times for permits and better customer service. Finally, we cannot continue to place the burden on Maryland's general fund for fee-based services. So with that short introduction, I want to turn it over to my colleague Les Knapp to talk a little bit more in detail about the bill before you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Mr. Knapp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Les Knapp on behalf of the Maryland Department of the Environment, or MDE, here in support of House Bill 245. And for the remainder of my testimony, I will address 4 key questions you likely have regarding this bill. The first question is, how did MDE decide what fees or programs need adjusting? And when looking at areas to adjust or create fees, we followed 4 guiding principles. The first was environmental and programmatic sustainability. So we considered where our programs are challenged with meeting mandatory environmental protection requirements or providing acceptable customer service. The second, which has become more critical, especially recently, is budgetary and fiscal sustainability. So we also considered which programs are running deficits, requiring backfilling with general funds, which come at the expense of Maryland taxpayers. The third guiding principle was the responsible party should pay. So a person who is receiving a service from the department or who created a problem that we now must address should be the party that pays. And fourth and finally, economic growth and leave no one behind. The department considered the impact of the fee changes on the economy, businesses, and the regulated community, and underserved and overburdened communities. Question 2, what is the fiscal impact of this bill? This bill will have a total annual fiscal impact of about $11.9 million. This includes $12.2 million in special funds reflecting both new annual revenues and the prevention of annual budget shortfalls. There will also be an annual total of $3.5 million in general fund savings. 3, what does this bill do? This bill makes a fee or program adjustments across all 3 of MDA's policy administrations, water, air, and land. And attached to our testimony is a bill summary that walks through each change made by the bill, why that change is necessary, and the fiscal impact of that change. I will quickly highlight the main changes proposed by the bill. For water, would authorize MDE to charge a well or septic permit application fee where we take over and are directly running the program. It would establish a fee for a responsible personnel training program to allow us to update and maintain that training. It would update our wetlands and waterways application fees based on the Consumer Price Index. This is a one-time raise in statute. It would also establish 2 fees connected to dams, with the revenue from those fees going to a new fund to offer loans and for private dam repairs. And this was actually in response to a request made by the Senate last session. For air, in response to federal direction, we would increase our air emission permit fees to a level where the fees can sustain the program. And for land, we would change the oil transfer fee to 9 cents per barrel, clarify when that fee is charged. We would alter the application fee for the voluntary cleanup program to allow for full cost recovery. It would increase licensing, renewal, and permit fees for non-coal surface mines. It would alter how the coal combustion byproduct fee is assessed in order to avoid the program's funding going to zero. And finally, it would increase the rental property lead registration fee from $30 to $60 a year and specify that the fee is paid every other year. Fourth and final question was there any stakeholder outreach as we worked on this bill? MDE conducted extensive stakeholder outreach to proactively address as many concerns as possible, particularly from the business and regulated communities. We believe this is reflected in the testimony received by this committee and the stakeholders that have opted not to take a position on this bill. Many of the amendments that are in the bill were offered by MDE in response to those stakeholder discussions. And we reached an agreement, for example, with county health officers and county environmental health directors regarding some clarifying language for the well and septic fee portion of the bill. We also addressed an issue with MBIA related to the septic portion. And finally, we also resolved an issue raised by NIOP regarding the dam portion of our bill. And at this point, we are only aware of a couple of specific areas of concerns, including the surface mining and the lead, and we remain open to continuing discussion and work on those issues. So in conclusion, we believe this bill reflects a careful and thoughtful approach to the challenges faced by our department. This bill will allow us to better protect the environment and the health of our residents, provide better customer service, and to the regulated community, and not impede economic growth and business. So accordingly, we ask for a favorable report on this bill. Thank you. And we also have several representatives from each of our administrations here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, questions for our MDE panel, and we're going to go to Vice Chair Kagan.
Thank you very much. Heather, I'm forgetting your last name.
Suzanne Dorsey.
I said that. Suzanne Dorsey. Thank you. Sorry.
No worries.
I'm really glad the secretary is absolutely where she needs to be. So please tell her we all send our support to her. Les, thank you for all that you've done. I have a quick question. And of course, as I was reading the bill, I lost where I was. Here it is. So on page 4 of 40, lines 18 through 22, it talks about that the money deposited in the fund may not revert to the general fund. Can you just briefly tell us why that's important, what the money is going to be used for? And then it's always a concern that people may supplant that money and say, well, they've already got all this money, so we don't need to give them any more. Sometimes I've seen language in there saying, yes, the money stays there because it's going to be used for an important purpose and it can't be supplanted. And as an old budget guy, like you know that well. So if you could speak to those 3 things, if that's not too much to throw at you all at once.
Absolutely. And I'll also call up Chris Hoagland from our Air and Radiation Administration to address this as well. But this is a reference to a cap on funding that will go into our clean air fund. So the Maryland Clean Air Fund, and this is used.
This is about reverting, specifically on reverting.
Yes.
Page 4.
So right now, the law requires, once you hit 2 million, that any additional money reverts to the general fund. And that puts a limit on cap on how we can assist facilities, both from the business community and communities, constituents who are having air pollution issues, with providing money to specifically remediate that. But I'll let Mr. Hoagland. provide some more.
Sure. Thank you. For the record, Chris Hoagland, Director of the Air and Radiation Administration of the Department of the Environment. Thank you for the question. As to the what the funds are used for, up at the top of the page is the existing language about the acceptable use of the Clean Air Fund. That fund we primarily use to manage the Air and Radiation Administration. It's mostly salaries. We also use those funds to purchase air monitoring equipment and perform contracts for research. Those are the core uses of the funds in the Clean Air Fund.
But if it's gonna, sorry, just to be a devil's advocate here. So if that fund is gonna have a whole bunch more money because it's not gonna have a $2 million cap, and we're talking about raising the rates up to 3% per year, blah, blah, blah. Are you gonna hire more people? So it'll be more salaries, more pins, more humans, or?
Right. The increases in the fees for the Clean Air Fund will supplant general funds. Right now, we are suffering a substantial shortfall in the fee proceeds because we've reduced air pollution so much. So the fee increases for the emissions fees in this bill will reduce our reliance on general funds that have been used to backfill that revenue loss.
So you are expecting that to happen and you're okay with it?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that's right. That's right. In the case of the air fees, as for the cap, the cap is quite tight, and we
Yes.
have about a $22 million budget. So having that $2 million cap is an operational constraint.
Got it. Thank you. Appreciate you both. Thank you.
Okay, Senator Gallion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Making things self-sustainable where the fees kind of match up to what the program's going to do, but my questions, I guess, would focus the first question on the surface mining program. I guess it goes from $12 an acre up to 75. There's currently $1,000 cap. It would go up to between $10,000 and $12,000 depending on the year. That just seems like a huge jump. What can you tell us why it went up that over 10-fold on that cap and about 6-fold on the per acre cost?
Absolutely. First off, those fees have not been adjusted in more than 30 years, and they do not now cover less than a quarter of the cost of the program. In 2009, our mining program was also given additional inspection requirements and responsibilities to do. So taking all that together, that is why what appears to be a significant jump is not. I will also note that comparatively to our adjoining states, our fees have remained, because they've not been adjusted for so long, relatively low. So this still kind of puts us in the middle of the pack with respect to those fees, comparatively, even when you look at West Virginia. This is money that will go to cover basic costs of this program, down to basic safety equipment like truck chocks to make sure trucks don't roll, vehicles, keeping up with personnel to do these inspection and on-site mines. And we tried to work very carefully, and the cap kind of came back into the bill because of negotiations we had with some in the mining industry. And that is one area I noted there is still a concern from members of the industry. We're still open to talking with them, but we're trying to balance what's a fair fee to charge to small to mid-size operators versus some of the really larger operators. And that's where we've had a little bit of a disconnect.
Okay, and then you mentioned the some CPI tied increases, I think a cap of 3% a year. Is that across the board on all this stuff or just on specific parts of?
There's that applies to one specific part where there would be a 3% CPI adjustment made, and that is to the well and septic permitting fees.
Okay, so that's just well septic.
That is correct.
And then one final thing, on the dam safety permits, and so I was trying to look in the bill. So I guess that's by size of the dam, or there's different levels on that?
Yes, it would be based on hazard level, which is the threat of a dam failure or breach would pose to both human life and property.
So what's the low end of that?
So we would set that by regulation. But again, we would look at probably for a low hazard dam, a couple $100. And the purpose of these fees is to go into a new fund to offer low interest or no interest loans to private dam owners, who can range all the way up from a big corporation all the way down to a single farmer or property owner, to repair their dams when they get into trouble.
Okay, now are those, and I've been looking through and I haven't been able to find it yet. Are those levels, is there a specific fee amount on those, or is that kind of at discretion of the department? I'm not
So
sure where in the bill.
that would be at the discretion of the department, but we're looking to raise about $618,000 annually to cover that money and put it in. So we would consider a potential registration fee of about $200 for a low hazard dam, $500 for a significant hazard dam, and $1,000 for a high hazard dam.
But are those numbers actually in the bill, or that's just what?
That
you're
would
gonna
be what
do
we would
through
look to set
regulation?
in regulation.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. You did a seat switch. Were you up here in response to that question? You're just here for backup? Okay.
Just here for support.
Any additional questions for Mr. Knapp, for the MDE team? We've got Senator Simon.
Thank you. Multitasking over here, and my ears perked up when I heard about these damn fees. Thank you, Senator Gallion. But seriously, you brought up the comparative with other states and fees and so forth. But I believe in the governor's speech, I think he mentioned we were the 6th or 7th most expensive state to live in currently before these fees. And right now, I've been kind of keeping track of what we're just in this committee. And with this bill, we're over $60 million requesting fees coming out of this committee. This is just one more. So I guess the question is, are you aware of anybody looking at the totality of all these fees and not just a silo of MDE and how it's going to impact Maryland and the expenses?
Take a crack on that. Thank you for your question. One of the constraints on our economy from the Department of Commerce, as well as the governor's office, is concerns about the time it takes, the turnaround time it takes for a permit. As you know, if you're a developer or somebody that's seeking a permit, the longer it takes to do the detailed review that we are required, our engineers are required to do, that time is money. And so based on the lack of opposition from our partners in the regulated community, I think you can interpret that to recognize that there is a value in increasing these fees at the level that we've done so to the regulated community and to our economy as a whole.
Okay, but my question was, did anybody look at the totality of all these fees? I mean, this bill's coming in with 11 or 12 million. DNR is coming in with a certain amount and so forth. And it impacts everybody. And I understand you're saying, people may say they haven't raised them a certain amount, or a certain amount of time. So some of them are justified and so forth, but also the impact of the economy, and it's not the one fee that's going to kill anybody or hurt them. It's the combination. We're talking about registration fees on cars going up. We're talking about phones fees going up. I mean, it's just so many new fees this year.
Yes, sir.
And can any of you assure me that somebody has looked at the impact of all these or most of these fees and the impact it's going to have on Marylanders?
So I can say from MDE's perspective, we are limited within our scope. We did try to take a more comprehensive approach on the fees we looked at with consulting with the regulated community, considering those economic impacts. And again, almost all of these fees don't raise like new pristine revenue. They're being raised to address where we have budgetary shortfalls, or they're already being subsidized by the taxpayers because we need additional general funds where we can try to relieve that with this. In terms of just total though, I mean, that is something that would go higher up than our department, but we at least did not. We were not able to look at a cumulative impact like that.
Okay, and thank you. And that's kind of the theme I've been hearing this session is, and I understand it's your department and you're focused on that, and I appreciate that. But I think someone needs to look at the total. And, it's death by 1,000 fees. It's my concern with that. So thank you.
Okay, any additional questions for the panel? Okay, seeing none, that brings us to a panel of unfavorables. We've got Jerry Evans, I see, Megan Owings, and finally Grayson Wiggins. Those are the three unfavorable witnesses. And each of you will be on the 2-minute clock. Mr. Evans, do you want to lead off?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Feller, Vice Chairman Kagan, thank you for the opportunity to testify. With me is Megan Bramble, She's owner of David A. Bramble of the Eastern Shore. I'm Jerry Evans, as I said, representing the Maryland Transportation Builders and Materials Association and the Maryland Asphalt Association. These group are thousands of men and women who design and build the state's roads, bridges, highways. We also mine the materials, largely sand and stone, that provide the critical ingredients to asphalt and concrete for the surface of our roads, as well as other building products. House Bill 245 enacts a 1,200% increase in the MDE mining inspection fee from $1,000 per year to over $12,000 per year. The bill represents a $1 million tax per year, a cost that will sadly be passed on directly to the citizens of Maryland, to the transportation budgets of MDOT and our counties and cities. Imagine the shock to your business or household if an essential item suddenly went from $1,000 a year to $12,000 in one day's time. Having said that, we recognize that the inspection fee has not been raised in years, and we support a reasonable increase phased in over time, but not 1,200% increase overnight. Wouldn't it be better to sit down over the summer and work together, industry and government, to work this issue to a collegial conclusion and report back to you with a bill for next session? With all due respect to my friend from MDE, this will put us way out of whack with other states in terms of fee. And with all due respect to the Deputy Secretary, she talks about sustainability and consistency. These businesses will leave, and we'll continue to see the exodus of businesses from Maryland, as the governor has commented on several times. With your permission, Mr. Chair, could I have the folks that came from the industry stand up and just be recognized?
Sure. Okay, why don't you stand up again? We had a limited testimony, but
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, there you go. Okay, why don't you tell us who you are? And again, you'll be under the 2-minute clock. Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Megan Owings. My company, David A. Bramble, Inc., is a third-generation owned heavy civil construction firm located on the Eastern Shore. We own and operate 2 asphalt plants and have surface mining operations in 5 Eastern Shore counties that total approximately 225 permitted acres. We use surface mine materials to support our construction and asphalt paving operations, helping us compete for work both with the state and privately. The use of these properties for mining is a long-term investment. There are some years where we may not mine a pit at all, but we maintain the permit because to do otherwise would involve a lengthy process for reapproval. The surface mining program is a well-run and efficient division of MDE. So these comments are not to say that we are against reasonable increases tied to the program's cost. However, Section 15803 of the environmental article requires when regulations are adopted for the administration of surface mining, they must recognize the basic and essential resource being used and the importance of the industry to the economic well-being of the state. In other words, the state should be encouraging surface mining rather than discouraging it through fees. The fee increases in the bill are significant. For me, it will be a 525% increase. In a time when the transportation construction industry is facing a record state funding deficit, the effect of this bill will also be to raise the cost of projects. This bill should not move forward unless the surface mining section is revised to language found elsewhere in the bill. And as pointed out, consulting with the industry to determine the permit fee is reasonable and directly related to the actual cost, that the fees do not exceed a certain dollar amount, and that they're tied to the CPI. These fee increase parameters are found currently in sections 1301, 2403, 4104, 5203.2. And since I have a little bit of time left, regarding the air permit fees in section 2403, I believe that the fee should not change as it's currently following the CPI, and that's already in the law. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Grayson Wiggins here on behalf of the Maryland Multi-Housing Association. I want to start my testimony by stating that my client supports the lead paint program at MDE. They spend a lot of time, effort, and expense in complying with that program, and their fees currently fund the activities at the department. I would just note the concern that my client has is on page 30, lines 9 through 13 and 23 through 25, where we're doubling the annual fee for lead paint affected units, and we are looking at a 500% increase for rental dwelling units that are lead free. We're going to hear a lot of talk in the next 2 weeks about affordable housing in the state of Maryland and how the state has a shortage of affordable housing. And fees, and this is one of a few fee bills that impact housing providers, increase the cost of rent. And it drives up the price of housing and reduces the state's affordable housing stock. The department noted that in their testimony just now that the responsible party should pay to fund the program. And I want to thank MDE for providing us with information prior to this hearing, but it appears that of the properties that MDE identified with lead hazards in 2021, which I guess is the most recent year of data that they have, 43% were owner occupied. Less than half of that were in rental housing, likely because of the state's extensive and strict rental regulations regarding lead paint. And so I've looked through this 42-page bill, and it seems like we are doing away with that line of reasoning and assessing this fee and trying to balance the budget on affordable housing. And for that reason, my client is exceptionally concerned. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions for this panel? 3 witnesses. Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 245. I'm going to turn it to the vice chair. We've got 3 bills from Delegate Boyce, and I think she's got a representative here to testify on those 3 bills. So I'll turn it to the vice chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Leslie Gray. There you go. Okay, welcome, Ms. Gray. We're going to start with House Bill 512, Natural Resources, Fish and Fisheries, Reporting Requirements, along with Delegate Boyce's representative, Ms. Gray. We have Sarah Widman and Dylan Baylor. Come on up. Ms. Gray, welcome to Triple E. I suspect that Delegate Boyce's legislation is in good hands.
Thank you.
You may begin your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Education, Energy, and Environment Committee. For the record, I am Leslie Gray DeVivo presenting HB 512 on behalf of Delegate Regina T. Boyce. The delegate apologizes for not being here today herself. She is feeling under the weather. HB 512 is a departmental bill that requires certain persons licensed or regulated by the Department of Natural Resources to submit reports as per regulations set by the Secretary of the Natural Resources. This legislation codifies the current practice of electronically reporting harvest by commercial fishermen. Incomplete and absent reports hinder DNR from managing fisheries optimally, impacting federal programs such as CARES and federal disaster determinations, as well as reducing available grant funds for fisheries management. DNR initiated the FACTS electronic reporting system in 2012 for blue crab harvesters and expanded it to include other groups like finfish harvesters, charter captains, and shellfish harvesters. FACTS offers easy access and real-time harvest information through a mobile web application, aiding both captains and fishery managers. HB 512 encourages accountable and timely reporting, utilizing the FACTS system's 24/7 availability and call center for improved accountability and random verification of reported activity and harvest. Commercial fishing operations are not immediately required to adopt electronic reporting under this law. Instead, it provides opportunities for affected parties to participate in its implementation. DNR offers extensive resources, including online training to assist watermen in understanding the state's electronic harvest reporting system. Effective reporting enables DNR scientists to analyze the fishing patterns for informed management decisions and ensures timely actions by holding the department accountable. The delegate and I thank the committee for your time and consideration and hope for a favorable report of HB 512.
Goodman or Mr. Baylor, in either order.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair and committee members. For the record, my name is Sarah Woodman with Fishing and Boating Services at the Department of Natural Resources. And Dylan Baylor, our Director of Legislative and Constituent Services, is also here with me today. I'd like to thank Delegate Boyce for introducing House Bill 512, and we're here today in strong support of that as amended. Just a couple of points. You guys have our written testimony, but a couple of points I'd like to highlight for you. First, this is only authorizing legislation. So the department currently does not have authority to establish electronic reporting requirements for our fisheries. The bill now addresses both commercial and recreational. By giving us the authority to do so, the department would ultimately seek to promulgate those regulations through process of scoping and public comment, review, public meetings, basically discussions with the members of our fishing community and partner groups. With this bill, we're not seeking to flip a switch and automatically require electronic reporting overnight. Second, in the absence of statutory authority to implement electronic reporting requirements on the commercial end, the department, as noted, has had the successful tool of the pilot program through the FACS e-reporting system since 2012. So an example of that, last year, there were a total of 35,442 trips reported in our electronic FACS system. Third, without electronic reporting as a tool in our toolbox, the department is significantly hindered in its ability to not only manage in the most sustainable way for our traditional fisheries in the Bay, but also new and emerging fisheries that show up as a result of things like climate change. So in the absence of the best and most accurate data collected in real time, the department is left with an incomplete picture of what's going on in the ecosystem, resulting in potential for reactionary and emergency management measures that are most likely more conservative than would be warranted if we had the information. And for these reasons, we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Mr. Baylor.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Dylan Baylor with the Department of Natural Resources here testifying in support of this bill. Of House Bill 512. Firstly, thank you, Leslie, for your testimony, and thank you, Delegate Boyce, for sponsoring this bill. I won't be repetitive. I just want to make a few underlying points to echo what Ms. Whitman said. One of the numbers that really stood out to me was 60%. So right now, we're at about 60% reporting across our commercial industries. And because of that, when we take conservation or management actions, we sometimes have to guesstimate that last 40%, which is not the best management practice. So the more data that we can figure out how to get, the more better data that we will have to make stronger management actions and management decisions. Secondly, I do want to just say that we worked with Delegate Jacobs on the House side as well to ensure that this bill does not just give this tool to just the commercial industry, but it's unilateral across both commercial and recreational fisheries. And with that, he was added as a co-sponsor. So I just wanted to give him a thank you as well for working with us on this. And with that, we would request a favorable report, and we're happy to answer any questions.
All. I see no lights from colleagues with questions, so that will complete the hearing on House Bill 512. Thank you. Turning it back to the chair, or you want me to keep going? All right. Next bill should be sponsor only, and it is House Bill 613, Delegate Boyce, Natural Resources, Recreational Catching of Oysters or Clams Requirements. Ms. Gray.
Good afternoon again. For the record, my name is Leslie Gray DeVivo, testifying on behalf of Delegate Regina T. Boyce for HB 613. HB 613 has been amended to include a clause that the Department of Natural Resources shall use a portion of the fee application, the percentage of which will be determined by the department to replenish the public fishery oyster bars by planting shell and juvenile oysters. HB 613 is a departmental bill that alters certain authorizations to recreationally catch clams in the state and establishes a recreational oyster license. Currently, Maryland does not have a recreational oyster license, which poses a challenge in tracking recreational harvests. The absence of such a license inhibits the effective management of our natural resources. Through HB 613, DNR aims to address this gap by introducing a $10 annual recreational oyster license. The proposed license will serve several crucial purposes. It will facilitate the tracking and management of recreational harvests by DNR. The license fee will contribute to the oyster replenishment efforts, aligning with existing surcharges for commercial harvesters. And under the proposed license, Maryland residents will be permitted to harvest up to 100 oysters per day. It is important to note that similar licenses already exist in other states. For instance, New Jersey offers a recreational shellfish license for $10 per year, a model that we believe is fair and effective in regulating recreational harvesting activities. HB 613 seeks to establish the $10 annual recreational oyster license for Maryland residents aged 16 and above. In conclusion, HB 16 represents a proactive step towards sustainable resource management and the prevention of our state's natural heritage. The delegate and I again thank the committee for your time and consideration of HB 613. And if there are any questions, DNR is here to answer them.
I actually have questions, but let me defer to Senator Croza.
For your testimony and coming over on behalf of Delegate Boyce. Tell her we missed her. And if you wanted the
Yes,
DNR
please.
representative to, my question is more along the lines of, we have some exemptions in for recreational, for fishing, when it comes to like military exemptions, when it comes to fishing on Sundays. Will these same, since we're doing recreational for oysters and for clams, will those same exemptions then apply in those areas, since we have them for fishing, would they would apply in this area as well?
So we didn't have them in there. We modeled this after our recreational crab licensing, which doesn't match the same. What you're talking about is in the non-tidal and tidal finfish, so angler licenses. I would have to look up the history. I don't know the history of why there's a dichotomy of those exemptions between those licenses, but that's where the modeling came from, was the crab, which is why it doesn't match exactly for.
So it seems a
fishing.
little inconsistent if we'd have some of those exemptions in the one area and not in the other.
And some of it might just be with reciprocity. As noted, there's not a ton of states that have oysters that their residents can harvest. And additionally, it's a resident only activity, so it differs kind of itself as is. But certainly it's something we could discuss.
If we could follow up on that.
Yeah, and we'll look into the crabbing license as well
Okay.
and figure out why there's some dichotomy already in current statute.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
A word nerd, can I just say, I love that you both use the word dichotomy. It's a good Scrabble word. I have a couple of questions. So I'm on page 3 of the bill. And as I was reading it, I noted that it applied to a state resident and didn't have citizen, which is great. So I approve of that. I am wondering about the last 4 of a social. So first off, do you collect that for all licenses? Second, how do you protect that personal identifying information? Because as you may or may not know, or others watching from home, the last 4 digits of your social security number are the only part that's unique to you. Because if I know where you were born and the year of your birth, I can figure out the first 5 digits. And so giving anyone the last 4, don't ever do it unless you're required to do it. So just wondering why. And then the next part of it is, if I'm a resident and not yet a citizen and I don't have a social security number, it does allow for that if there is one, but it doesn't allow for an alternative, an ITIN or other identifying information. And so I just wonder if you could speak to kind of all of that about a social security number.
Yes. So I would have to go, my memory's failing me at the moment, but there is a rule that requires us to collect that information. And
A rule or a law?
There's a law, not
Okay.
a rule. Let me use my good grammar again. I just can't remember. I think it's a federal law and I'd have to go look that up for you, but I can provide you that information when I get back to the office. So that's why it's there. We do that with all the other recreational licenses now because of the law requiring the collection of that. And we do, it has a social security, but there is a drop-down menu on our website because obviously some citizens might have something varying depending on their residency and how they're here. But I think it was because it's a resident thing that we made an assumption that you would have that number. But certainly that's already built into our system that there's the drop-down menu that you pick which one you're going to choose.
But the bill doesn't seem to indicate that there's a drop down or other option.
Right. We
It-
can certainly clarify. Absolutely.
I think that probably could be tightened up.
Sure.
And then again, the piece of how you're protecting people's PII, personal
Yes,
identifying
I
information.
can get you that information. I know there's a system that does that. It's our licensing unit that handles it. But I can get you information on how that works now.
Okay. Persisting, since Senator Hester isn't here, just about, are you working with DO-IT, the Department of Information Technology? Are we doing best practices and making sure that information stays protected?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, no, I was chairing. Okay, never mind. I see no other questions. That completes the hearing on Senate Bill 613. Thank you both. And Ms. Gray, the final bill of yours here, sponsor only, House Bill 1318, Delegate Boyce, Wasted Food Reduction and Diversion Fund and Grant Programs established. And again, you are the only witness.
Good afternoon, members of the Education, Energy, and Environment Committee. Again, I am Leslie Gray DeVivo on behalf of Delegate Regina T. Boyce presenting HB 1318. HB 1318 establishes two grant programs, the Wasted Food Reduction and Diversion Program overseen by the Department of Agriculture, and the On-Farm Organics Diversion and Recycling Grant Program, which would be managed by the Department of the Environment. These programs aim to reduce, reuse, compost, and recycle wasted food, as well as promote on-farm organics recycling and compost usage. Furthermore, a portion of the funds from these grants supports the school waste reduction composting program. However, the bill was amended in the House to remove the surcharge that was initially intended to fund these programs. Instead, during the interim, MDE, MDA, and stakeholders will collaborate to identify a permanent funding source. These programs provide grants to eligible entities for various initiatives, including on-farm organics recycling, compost usage, wasted food prevention, and food rescue. The primary objectives of the bill are to address gaps in state programming related to organic waste, composting, and wasted food reduction, and to establish the necessary infrastructure for enhancing organic waste diversion. The bill aims to reduce the annual amount of solid waste processed, ensure adequate funding for recycling programs, especially for on-farm organic recycling, and mitigate wasted food throughout Maryland. According to the EPA, more than 42 million tons of food scraps are sent to landfills or incinerated annually in the United States, largely due to the insufficient funding for waste prevention and recycling efforts. Additionally, the EPA has already implemented solid waste reduction and recycling grant programs nationwide, including the Solid Waste Infrastructure for Recycling Program, which supports the National Recycling Strategy and local post-consumer materials management and recycling programs. HB 1318 also supports small businesses and local communities by providing grants for waste prevention, food rescue, and recycling initiatives. Moreover, the bill provides funding for projects benefiting overburdened communities and facilitates partnerships between nonprofits. The delegate and I thank the committee for your time and consideration and hope for a favorable report for HB 1318. Thank you.
I see no questions from the committee, so that completes the hearing on House Bill 1318.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, that completes our bill work for today. We are gonna transition in about, let's say 20 minutes, 3:30, come back here. And we're gonna do some voting. And so see you back here at 3:30 and we'll take it from there.